I was in the mechanical bay arguing with a coolant pipe when the children died. That is the sentence I have rehearsed for 5 years, and it still does not sit right in my mouth. It feels too small, too tidy, like a thorn trying to describe a wildfire. My name is Yara Osei. I am a commander in the United Earth Navy, and I was supposed to be on the observation deck at 1400 hours, with 43 children, who had traveled from 11 colony worlds, to say hello to the galaxy. I was not there because the environmental seal on intake valve 7 had been leaking recycled air for 3 days, and nobody had fixed it, and I had finally decided to fix it myself, because apparently the only person on this entire diplomatic ring who owned a wrench was me. The pipe hissed. I cursed at it. The wrench slipped. Then the lights went red. Then the floor shook in a way that floors should not shake. Not vibration. Not turbulence. Something had come apart somewhere above me. Something structural. I grabbed the wall. The wall grabbed back. The alarms were not sounding the way alarms sound for a drill. In a drill they pulse twice per second. Clean and rhythmic. Almost polite. What came out of the ceiling speakers was a sound I had only heard once before in my entire career. And that was during a simulation I was not cleared for. A simulation designed to make seasoned officers understand in their bodies what catastrophic hull failure felt like. It sounded like the station swallowing itself. I got my helmet sealed in 4 seconds. Fastest I have ever done it. My hands did it without me. My hands are smarter than I am in a crisis, which is the only reason I am alive. The feed in my helmet lit up. Deck 3, gone. Deck 4, venting. Observation lounge. No signal. I stood in the mechanical bay with coolant dripping off my left arm, and I looked at the observation lounge readout, and I understood what no signal meant, and the part of my brain that was trained to function under pressure said, "You need to move. You need to get to an escape pod. You need to survive this so you can report it." And I agreed with that part of my brain. I listened to it. I moved exactly as it told me to. But there was another part, smaller, sitting in the back like a child in a corner. That part was counting. 43. The pod bay was 2 corridors east and 1 level down. I ran corridors I had walked every morning for 6 weeks, and they looked completely wrong with the red lights bleeding through the smoke. 2 other crew members caught up with me in the second corridor. Lieutenant Dawson, engineering. Private Cora Webb, security detail. Dawson had a cut above his eye. Webb was not bleeding, but she was holding her left arm the way you hold a thing that is broken. We did not speak. There was nothing to say. We ran. The pod launched and the station shrank behind us in the viewport, and I did not look away from it. I made myself look. I owed those 43 children at least the courtesy of watching. What was left of the observation deck was open to space. The windows I had walked past every morning, the windows the children had been pressing their faces against to watch the star clusters, those windows were gone. And in the space where those windows had been, catching the light of the nearest star, were small things drifting. Papers, data pads, a backpack with a cartoon animal on the patch. Drawings. They had taped their drawings to the inside of the observation windows on the first day. 43 children from 11 worlds, and the first thing they did when they arrived was tape their crayon drawings to the glass. Purple planets, blue suns, alien friends holding human hands. Their teachers had tried to suggest they wait and ask permission, and the children had already been taping for 2 minutes before anyone finished that sentence. The drawings were drifting. I watched them until the pod's automated systems kicked the viewport cover closed, and I could not see anymore. Then I found the black box recorder in the pod's emergency kit. My voice, when I activated it, was completely level. That is the thing about my particular flavor of falling apart. I go very quiet. I go very still. I become extremely precise. I said my name, my authentication code, the timestamp. Then I said what I had seen. I described the Veth dreadnought decloaking above the ring with no warning signal, no declaration, no communication prior to weapons discharge. I described the interior breach pattern, which was not consistent with a standard engagement. It was consistent with a targeted demolition, specific decks, specific areas. Someone had known the layout. Someone on the inside had fed them the layout. I described the ambassador's voice coming over the open channel in those final seconds before the pod sealed. His voice was calm in the way mathematics is calm. No heat, no anger, just a calculation delivered aloud. He had said, The human experiment concludes. Removing the seed prevents the harvest. I played it back in my head 3 times to make sure I had the words right. Then I pressed record again, and I said the next part. I said that the target had not been a military installation. I said that the target had not been a weapons cache, or a command node, or a strategic asset. I said that the beings who authorized this action had chosen, deliberately, and with full knowledge, to direct their weapons at children. Dawson was watching me from across the pod. Webb had her eyes closed. I finished the recording. I marked it priority transmission. I sent it to Earth. Then I sat with the wrench still in my hand, and I did not say anything for a very long time. Dawson eventually spoke. He said, quietly, that his daughter had been on the observation deck that morning. She was 12. She had begged to come on this assignment. She had told everyone at her school she was going to meet real aliens and draw pictures with them. I looked at the wrench in my hand. I set it down very carefully on the seat beside me. Then I pressed record again on the black box unit. I said, "This is Commander Yara Ose. Additional note, timestamp follows." I said, "They did not know what they just started." I clicked it off. Outside the viewport cover, the stars did not move. The pod drifted on its retrieval signal, patient as everything in space is patient. Dawson was crying without making any sound. Webb had her eyes open now, and she was staring at a point on the pod floor that had nothing on it. I thought about 43 drawings drifting in the vacuum. I thought about what removing the seed prevents the harvest meant when you translated it out of the cold language of calculation into something honest. It meant they had done this because they were afraid of us. Not of our weapons, not of our fleets, not of our military capacity. They had done this because we were spreading. Colony by colony, system by system, humans were filling the galaxy the way water fills a space. Patient and total and unstoppable. And the Veth, who had held dominion over the Verdani arm for 4 centuries, had looked at the projections and decided that the most efficient solution was not a war. Wars are expensive. Wars produce martyrs. Wars produce grudges that outlast the generation that started them. No, they had decided the most efficient solution was a lesson, a message, something so terrible and so clean that humanity would understand, at a cellular level, that this galaxy was not theirs to fill. They had done the calculation. They had decided that 43 children were an acceptable variable. I sat with that for the remaining 11 hours of the pod's drift toward the retrieval ship. When the airlock of the retrieval vessel opened and the crew came in and saw our faces, nobody asked what happened. They already knew. The whole arm already knew. The Veth had not sent the transmission privately. They had broadcast it on every open frequency. They wanted humanity to get the message clearly. I walked through the retrieval ship's corridor, and a young crewman stepped aside to let me pass, and his face was the face of someone trying very hard to hold something enormous inside a very small container. I knew that face. I was wearing it. We all were. The first thing Earth did was go quiet. I know that sounds like nothing, like absence, like a gap where something should be. But I had worked in Earth system operations for 11 years, and I want you to understand that Earth is never quiet. 8 billion people, 300 active colonial relay chains, commercial traffic, diplomatic channels, entertainment broadcasts, weather satellites talking to agricultural drones, talking to shipping networks. The signal noise of human civilization is a constant living roar. You stop hearing it the same way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. For 72 hours after my transmission reached Earth, that roar dropped to something I had never heard before. Not silence. Something more deliberate than silence. A held breath. I was on a medical station at the edge of the retrieval zone, in a bed with 2 cracked ribs I had not noticed acquiring, watching the council broadcast on a screen someone had propped at the foot of my bed. The Secretary General was speaking. Her name was Amara Diop, and she was 71 years old, and she had spent 40 of those years in rooms where every word carried the weight of decisions that would outlive the people making them. She spoke for 4 minutes. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She listed the names. All 43 names. She said them the way you say something you will never stop saying. Then she said that Earth was in the process of understanding what had happened and determining what happened next. She said those 2 things, and then the broadcast ended. No rhetoric, no declaration, No thunder. The Accord ambassador from the Charathi sent a message of condolence within the hour. The Pelian Federation sent two. 3 of the neutral species issued formal statements, expressing deep regret and calling for restraint and a measured response. The word measured appeared in 6 of those statements. I counted. I was lying in a medical bay with cracked ribs and nothing to do but read diplomatic language and count certain words. Measured. As if the primary concern was that humanity might react in a way that was proportionally inconvenient. The Veth issued a statement also. I read it 3 times because I wanted to make sure I was understanding it correctly. They acknowledged the event. They did not apologize for it. Their language framed what they had done as a necessary strategic correction in response to projected destabilization of the galactic equilibrium. They cited population modeling. They cited expansion velocity charts. They cited a study on resource competition in 3-body systems. They had murdered 43 children, and their official statement read like a quarterly report. In my medical bay, in the quiet, I thought about the word measured and the word equilibrium, and how they both meant the same thing when you strip them back to their bare bones. We would like you to feel this, but not too much. We would like your grief to stay inside the lines we have drawn for it. We would like you to respond in a way that is convenient for us. Dawson came by on the 2nd day. He sat in the chair beside my bed. He did not bring anything. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said that Earth had lit up the 43 names on every major city skyline simultaneously. No ceremony, no speeches. Just the faces, just the names. Every city on the planet, and every colony hub within relay range. All at once, without announcement. He said he had seen a feed from the Warsaw display. He said the crowd was thousands of people, and nobody was chanting, and nobody was holding signs, and nobody was performing anything. They were just looking up. He was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, "That is the part that is going to matter." I did not ask him what he meant. I knew what he meant. I had seen that look before. Not in space, not in any military briefing. I had seen it on the face of my grandmother when she talked about certain things that had happened in her lifetime, things that her own grandmother had lived through. There was a specific quality to that look, a specific temperature to it. It was not hot. Hot burns itself out. Hot is what you feel when the thing is happening. This was what came after. When the thing had finished happening, and you had finished feeling it, and you had gone somewhere very deep inside yourself, and found something that did not have a name in any of the 30 languages the Accord used as diplomatic standards. Something that was not vengeance, not grief, not even anger. Something older than all of those. The council session was closed, but the vote leaked within 6 hours, the way all things of consequence leak. 3 days of deliberation behind sealed doors, and the result was 2 words of preamble before the operational language began. No mercy. The Accord was informed. Not consulted, not asked for their perspective. Informed by direct channel that humanity was recalling its diplomatic personnel from every Accord station effective immediately. I was officially recalled while still in the medical bay. The nurse who brought me the discharge papers looked at them before she handed them over. She did not comment. She just handed them to me and left. I sat in the bed for a moment with the papers in my hand. Then I got up, found my clothes, and went to find the transport. In the shuttle bay, waiting for clearance, I sat beside a communications officer named Philip Crane. He was maybe 24 years old. He had a photograph of his younger brother on his screen, the way you keep a photograph when you look at it often. His brother looked about 11. He caught me looking and turned the screen face down, not in an embarrassed way, in the way you protect something. We did not speak for the entire 4-hour shuttle ride. He held the face-down screen on his knee the whole way. When the shuttle docked and we walked out into the main corridor, he stopped for a moment and looked at the wall. Just the wall, nothing on it. He stood there for 3 seconds, and then he turned left toward the crew manifest office, and I turned right toward the briefing center, and that was the last time I saw Philip Crane, before everything that came next. I thought about him for a long time afterward, about the photograph, about the way he had turned it face down, about the specific kind of love that makes you turn something face down so you cannot see it while you decide what you are going to do. The briefing center was full. Officers I recognized, officers I did not recognize, personnel from divisions I had no operational overlap with. The room was too small for the number of people in it, and nobody was complaining about the crowding, because crowding was not what anyone was thinking about. Admiral Soren Valkyries walked in without ceremony. He was a broad man in his late 40s, unremarkable in the way that genuinely dangerous things are often unremarkable. He had hair that was going silver at the temples, and a coffee cup in his hand, and he looked like someone's uncle, who happened to command the largest classified military mobilization in human history. He said, "You have been briefed on Directive 7. You have been briefed on your assignments. I am going to tell you one thing before we proceed, and I want it in every personal log and every black box recording in this fleet." He drank from his coffee. He said, "We are not doing this because we are angry. Anger is a feeling. Feelings end. We are doing this because we made a promise to 43 people who cannot hold us to it anymore. So we are going to hold ourselves to it." He set the coffee down. He said, "Dismissed to stations." That was the whole speech. I found my station. I strapped in. Through the viewport I could see the fleet assembling, and that was the moment I understood something that the Veth strategists, with all their modeling and all their projection charts, had fundamentally and catastrophically failed to understand. They had calculated our fleet strength. They had not calculated what we had been building quietly, for 60 years, in the spaces where no one was watching. The thing about the Veth is that they are brilliant. I want to say that plainly and mean it, because what comes next could make it seem like I am dismissing them. I am not. 400 years of galactic dominance does not happen by accident. They built an empire on calculation and patience, and a quality of intelligence that operates the way deep water operates: cold, enormous, and indifferent to the things that move along the surface. They were brilliant. They were also wrong about us in a way that their brilliance made worse, not better. I am Yara Osei, and I am now the witness officer of the Cradle Fleet, which means my job is to document everything. What I decide, what I eat, what I observe, what I hear. All of it goes into the record. There will come a time, after this is over, when people will want to know exactly what happened and exactly why. My job is to make sure that record is so complete and so honest that no one will ever be able to say they did not know. So here is what I knew on the day the Cradle Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Veth sovereign space. I knew that the Accord had intelligence files on the United Earth Navy. Those files were accurate: fleet strength, vessel classes, weapons ratings, logistical chains. The Accord had been watching humanity's military capacity for 60 years, and their numbers were correct. What the files did not have was the Cradle Protocols. The Cradle Protocols did not officially exist. They had not officially existed for 31 years, since a classified session of the UN Security Council, in which a group of people who had read their history very carefully decided that any species joining a galactic coalition should maintain, in absolute secrecy, the capacity to defend itself if that coalition turned hostile. Not because they expected the worst, because they had been the worst once, to each other, and they understood what the worst looked like when it was coming. The protocols were built across 40 colony worlds over 3 decades, manufacturing nodes distributed across systems so widely that destroying any one of them would accomplish nothing. Command architecture designed to survive decapitation, which is a very specific military term for the elimination of central leadership, designed so that if Earth itself were gone, the fleet would not stop. And then there was the thing they called the Patience. The Patience was a drone network, 30,000 autonomous combat units, collectively coordinated by an artificial intelligence that had been training in deep space simulations for 27 years. It had been sitting dormant in a distributed cluster at the edge of the solar system, waiting, which was what gave it its name. Not because anyone thought it was patient, because patience was what the entire protocols required, and the patience was the protocols made physical. When the Cradle Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, it took 3 hours for the Patience to fully deploy. I watched it from the bridge viewport. 3 hours of metal blooming in the dark. 30,000 units coming online one cluster at a time, the way stars come out at dusk. First 1, then 3, then too many to count individually. The Veth forward sensor arrays would be watching this. Their analysts would be seeing numbers that did not match their files. I thought about what that felt like on their end. I thought about a model that was correct in every variable but one. Admiral Valkyries came to stand beside me at the viewport. He had his coffee again. I was beginning to think the coffee was structural, that he might be part coffee. He said, "How long do you think before they open a channel?" I said, 20 minutes. They will want to rerun their projections first. He said, 19. They run fast. He was right. 18 minutes after the patients finished deploying, a VETH communication request came through on the diplomatic frequency, the frequency they had used for 60 years of Accord business, the formal channel, the please sit at our table channel. Valkris looked at it on the screen. He did not open it. He handed his coffee to the nearest crew member, who took it with the expression of someone handed an unexpected ceremonial object. He said to the communications officer, "Mark it received." No response. The communications officer marked it received. The VETH sent a second communication 12 minutes later. This one had the word reparations in the subject header. Valkris did not look at that one. He said to me, "You are the witness. Put in the record that we received 2 communications and chose to proceed without response. Make sure the timestamps are there." I said, "Already in." He said, "Good." Then he said, "Begin." What happened next I will describe in terms of what it looked like from where I was standing, because that is what a witness does. A witness does not describe what she imagines. She describes what she sees. I saw the patients move. I have spent a great deal of time since that day trying to find the right word for how it moved. The closest I can get is that it did not move the way machines move. Machines have a certain logical progression. They do one thing, and then another thing. Sequential. The patients did not do sequential. It did simultaneous, in a way that looked less like a military engagement, and more like something alive responding to a stimulus. The VETH forward defense stations were extraordinary pieces of engineering. I had read the technical assessments. They had been built over a century. They were layered, redundant, calibrated for every known weapons signature in explored space. They had been calibrated for known signatures. The patients had spent 27 years in simulation, developing approaches that were not in any Accord tactical database, not because they were so advanced, because they were so strange. The targeting logic of the patients was not based on efficiency. It was based on something the engineers who built it had described in their design documents as emotional modeling, which sounds unscientific and maybe even a little worrying, but what it meant in practice was this. The patients made decisions the way humans make decisions under extreme stress. Not optimal, not predictable, responsive to the specific moment, in a way that no deterministic system can fully anticipate. The VETH tactical network was extraordinary at responding to deterministic systems. It kept trying to find the pattern. There was not a pattern. There was something that 30 years of human anxiety, compressed and refined, and given the ability to move, looked like when it finally moved. I was recording everything. My voice was level and my words were precise, and every 4 minutes or so I stopped dictating, and I sat with the wrench that I had brought from the mechanical bay, and that I had, for reasons I did not examine too closely, kept in my left hand since the pod, and I held it until my hand steadied, and then I kept dictating. On the 3rd day of the engagement, the VETH opened a 3rd channel. This one was not on the diplomatic frequency. This one was on the emergency humanitarian frequency, which no species had used for an active military engagement before, because the emergency humanitarian frequency was for natural disasters and medical crises, not for wars. Using it for a war was an admission. The communication was brief. It asked what conditions would lead to a cessation of hostilities. I read it, and then I read it again. Valkris was eating a nutrition bar when I brought it to him. He read it. He finished the nutrition bar. Then he asked me to draft a response. I drafted 3 conditions. Full extradition of everyone who authorized, designed, and executed the massacre. Not summaries, not diplomatic handovers. Full extradition to Earth Tribunal, with documentation. A monument, on Veth Prime, in the most visible public location that existed on their most populated world. A permanent structure containing the 43 names, the 43 faces, and whatever of the children's belongings had been recovered, maintained by the Veth government. In perpetuity, non-negotiable. The same conditions applied to every species that had co-signed the attack. Valkris read the 3 conditions. He said, "No territorial claims?" I said, "No." He said, "No reparations?" I said, "No." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Send it." The Veth strategists, by accounts I read later in the tribunal records, ran the 3 conditions through their modeling software 7 times. They kept expecting to find the hidden demand. The 4th condition that was really the first condition, the leverage mechanism wrapped inside the apparent simplicity. There was no 4th condition. Humanity wanted 3 things, and all 3 of them were about the 43 children, and none of them were about power. The Veth found that more difficult to process than the engagement itself. I know because the Veth ambassador, whose name translates roughly to something like calculation in deep water, told me so directly. He told me during the tribunal, after the extradition, after everything. He said his people had a word for an opponent who fights to win, and a word for an opponent who fights to conquer. They had no word for what humanity had done, because they had no category for a civilization that went to war, not to gain anything but to say something. I told him we had a word for it. He asked what it was. I said, grief. He sat with that for a long time. Then he said, we did not understand what that meant. We thought grief was a weakness, a temporary dysfunction. I said, it is not temporary. He was quiet. I said, it is what we carry. It is what we build from. It does not end, and it does not make us weak. It makes us remember. And we never stop remembering. He looked at me with the compound eyes that his species has, which can see 17 more frequencies of light than human eyes can see, and I thought about how much that must be, seeing that much, and how in all of that vast expanded vision, he had still completely failed to see us. There is a room on Veth Prime. I visited it 14 months after the tribunal concluded and the monument was formally completed. Getting there required a pressure suit and a guide because Veth Prime has a methane atmosphere and a surface temperature that human biology finds extremely rude. I wore the suit, and I followed the guide, and we went through 3 sealed transition chambers, and then the guide opened a door and stood aside, and I walked through alone. It is the only warm room on the planet. That was not accidental. The engineers who built it, who were Veth engineers working from human specifications, had asked our diplomatic liaison what temperature the room should be maintained at. Our liaison had said, the temperature of a classroom. A human classroom, for children between 8 and 16 years of age. The room is kept at 21 degrees. It is the warmest place on Veth Prime by a significant margin. The walls are the color of light through water. The ceiling has a small viewport that looks at the nearest star. Along the walls, evenly spaced, are 43 panels. Each panel has a name at the top in large letters. Beneath the name is a photograph. Beneath the photograph is a short biography. Not a formal biography. The families wrote them. They wrote about what the children liked to eat, and what they were afraid of, and what they wanted to be when they grew up, and what they talked about in the week before they left for the Accord Ring. One panel belongs to a boy named Owen. He was 9 years old and he wanted to be an astronomer, and he was afraid of geese, specifically geese, for reasons that his father wrote about with tremendous affection, and the exact amount of gentle humor that a father uses when he is trying to hold himself together while writing about his son. One panel belongs to a girl named Mara. She was 15. She had already applied to 3 universities, and her mother said she was the most stubborn person she had ever met, and said it in a way that made clear she meant it as the highest possible compliment. I stood in front of each panel. I had asked to come alone, and they had given me a loan. In the center of the room, in a case that will survive anything short of the planet itself failing, are the drawings, the ones recovered from the debris field. Not all of them made it. Some were too damaged, but 31 of the original 43 survived, and they are here, behind glass that is engineered to last longer than any building either of our species has ever constructed. Purple planets with smiley faces. A drawing of 2 hands, one large and one small, one human, and one belonging to a species the child had clearly invented for the purpose. A drawing of a sun, with too many rays, and a spaceship that is enthusiastically aerodynamically impossible. I stood in front of the drawings for a while. I had thought I knew how I was going to feel in this room. I had been wrong. What I felt was not what I had prepared for. It was not the hot thing. It was not even the cold thing. It was something very still and very clear, like a frequency I had not known I could hear until I was standing in the right room to receive it. I stayed 11 minutes. I did not stay longer. because I did not think I could. Outside, in the pressure suit, walking back through the transition chambers, the guide asked through the suit comms whether the room had been as I expected. I said, no. He asked, how was it different? I said, I thought it would feel like an ending. It does not feel like an ending. He asked what it felt like. I had to think about that for a moment. Then I said, it feels like a door, one that does not open, but one that will always be there. He did not say anything for the rest of the walk back. There are things that happened in the years between the fleet engagement and now that belong in the official record, and they are in the official record, thoroughly documented, in the 83 volumes that comprise the Cradle Tribunal archive and the subsequent records of the new diplomatic framework that replaced the Accord. The new framework has no name that translates elegantly into any of the 30 Accord languages. In English, it is simply called the Foundation. Every species that enters it signs a document that is 14 pages long and contains, as its preamble, before any of the operational language, the 43 names. All of them. Every time. You cannot enter humanity's diplomatic house without reading the names first, without sitting with them for however long it takes to read 43 names, which is about 90 seconds. 90 seconds that several species have formally objected to as excessive, and which humanity has, with complete consistency, declined to remove. Several species have called the requirement emotional. We have agreed that it is. That is the point. I got home in the spring, 2 years after the fleet. My sister's house in Bristol has a garden that is perpetually losing its war with weeds, and when I arrived she had been winning a battle in the back corner for about a week, and the victory was clearly tentative. Her daughter, Sienna, came out of the house before I reached the door, and stopped on the step, and looked at me with the evaluating stare that 8-year-olds specialize in. Then she said, "You look different." I said, "I am different." She considered this. She said, "Did you see aliens?" I said, "Many." She said, "Were they cool?" I said, "Some of them. Some of them were not." She appeared satisfied with this as an answer, and went back inside to watch whatever she had been watching. My sister came around from the garden with mud on her knees, and she looked at me and I looked at her, and we did the thing families do when the thing is too large to address immediately, which is to go inside and put the kettle on and argue about whose turn it is to rinse the mugs. That night, after Sienna was asleep, my sister and I sat at the kitchen table, and she asked me what it was like, and I tried to find a version I could give her that was honest and not too heavy to carry home with you. I told her about the monument room. I told her about the 43 panels, and the temperature that was set to classroom warmth, and the drawings behind the glass that will outlast anything either species builds. My sister is not a military person. She teaches secondary school mathematics and she coaches her daughter's football team on weekends, and her relationship to what I do for a living has always been a sort of proud unease, the way you feel about someone you love who does a thing you cannot fully picture. She listened to the whole description. Then she said, "So they built the room." I said, "They built it." She said, "Good." There was nothing else to say about it, and so we moved on to other things. The weeks at home were the longest continuous stretch I had spent in one place in 4 years. I learned that Sienna had a best friend named Poppy, who she was temporarily not speaking to over an incident involving a shared book that had not been returned on schedule. I learned that my sister's kitchen light had a flicker that nobody had fixed in 8 months, and I fixed it on a Tuesday afternoon with a ladder and a replacement bulb, and I felt an enormous disproportionate satisfaction about this. I learned that I could not watch certain news programs without needing to go outside afterward and stand in the garden until the feeling passed. I also learned that I was not the only one. People I had served with sent messages, short ones mostly, checking in. Sentences that did not elaborate much, but that meant things under the surface that did not need elaborating. Philip Crane, the young officer from the shuttle, sent me a message that said only that his brother had turned 12 and had asked for a telescope for his birthday and had gotten one. I wrote back and said that was very good news. He wrote back one word: yes. Dawson, who had lost his daughter, did not send messages. He sent, once, a photograph. It was a photograph of a drawing, one of the recovered ones from the monument room, the one his daughter had made on the morning of the attack, before the attack, in the breakfast hour when the children had free time before the formal program began. He had been allowed to see it during the tribunal when the recovered items were catalogued. His daughter had drawn the observation ring from outside. The way it looked from space, with stars all around it and inside the windows, visible through the little square she had drawn for the glass, a tiny figure with a round head and straight-line arms and a smile. She had drawn herself, inside the station, looking out. I kept the photograph. There are things that Sienna asks about that I answer, and things she asks about that I deflect. Not because I think she cannot handle knowing things, but because some things need to wait until a person is old enough to carry them without being bent by the weight. She is 8, and she is curious about everything, with the comprehensive enthusiasm of someone who has not yet learned that curiosity can be painful. One afternoon, 3 weeks into my leave, she was doing homework at the kitchen table, and I was supposedly reading a book and actually watching her do homework, and she looked up and said, "Aunt Yara." I said, "Yes." She said, "Was the war scary?" I set the book down. I looked at her. I thought about the pod viewport closing. I thought about the drawings in the dark. I thought about Philip Crane with the photograph face down on his knee. I thought about the warm room on the cold planet and the door that does not open. I said, "Yes." She chewed on her pencil for a moment. She said, "But you came home." I said, "I did." She nodded, accepting this as sufficient, and went back to her homework. Long division. She was getting 3 out of every 5 wrong, which I had noticed over the last week, but had not mentioned, because she was also figuring it out herself, in real time, and it seemed important to let her do that. She caught a mistake, erased it, redid it correctly. She did not look up, but she said, "I think that is good, that you came home." I said, "Me too." Outside, the Bristol spring was doing what it always does, which is behave like 3 different seasons in the same afternoon, rain and then sun, and then that specific British grey that is somehow both at once. Sienna's football was in the garden getting rained on. The kitchen light I had fixed on Tuesday was working perfectly, and the kitchen was bright. I thought about the Chorathy representative, the one who had called us the weeping species, the one who had put his head in his hands in the accord chamber when Amara Diop walked out without a word. He had said, later, to the xenopsychologist who documented the tribunal proceedings, that he had spent his entire career studying humanity and had believed he understood us. He said that what he had failed to understand was this, that the same quality that made us weep at music was not a separate thing from the quality that made us fight the way we fought, that it was the exact same thing, that we were not 2 species sharing one body, the soft species and the hard species, the one who cries and the one who does not stop. We were one species and we did both completely, with the whole of ourselves, holding nothing back, because that is the only way we have ever known how to be alive. He had said, "We saw your tears and thought it meant you could be broken." He had said, "We did not understand that the things you love and the things you fight for are the same things, that there is no gap between them, that for your species, love is not the thing you protect by becoming something else. Love is the engine. Love is what you fight with." Sienna got 4 out of the next 5 long divisions correct. She looked up when she finished the page and said, "Can you check them?" I checked them. I said, "That one is wrong. All the others are right." She looked at the wrong one. She found her mistake. She fixed it. She said, "There." I said, "There." She closed the book, satisfied, and slid off the chair to go find out what was happening in whatever corner of the house held the most interesting thing at that moment, which with Sienna was always changing, and I sat at the kitchen table in the fixed light, with the rain tapping the window, and I thought about 43 children who had taped their drawings to the glass because they wanted the galaxy to see what they had made. Who had done it without asking permission because they were 8 and 9 and 10 and 12 and 15, and they were happy, and they were curious, and they thought the galaxy was beautiful, and they could not have imagined yet that the galaxy might look back at them and calculate. I thought about the warm room on the cold planet. I thought about Owen, who was afraid of geese, and Mara, who was the most stubborn person her mother had ever known. I thought about 31 drawings behind glass that would outlast everything. The rain picked up. The kitchen was bright. I stayed where I was,